Hello, welcome to the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host and fellow strategist, Jeff Hyatt. This is your go-to spot for real talk with the masterminds of business strategy. It's about sharing stories, insights, and those little nuggets of wisdom to help you unlock big growth. Let's turn the key and spring into action.
So what I'm really most interested to hear about, Martina, is when you're working at Microsoft and Bill Gates tells you to fix it.
Yeah, not in those precise words.
Well, this is a family show. And I won't say there's a direct line from that experience to your book, Loved, How to Rethink Product Marketing for Tech Products. But I do think there probably is a few war stories included. So with that, I want to turn it over to you and introduce yourself before we get into the backstory of your time at Microsoft.
Well, as Jeff alluded to, so Martina Lauchengco, half Filipino, half German, which is why I have both names there. And I started my career at Microsoft, first for Microsoft Word, then Microsoft Office. Learned a ton about software in a very structured, organized environment, and then went to Netscape when the internet happened, where it was barely controlled chaos. Learned a lot about that approach and how Silicon Valley is foundationally different than every other technology ecosystem. And then went with Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen as they started Loudcloud, and then have spent about a decade as an advisor to companies in teaching, and then spent my last decade working for a boutique venture capital firm called Costanoa Ventures. And that's roughly my path.
It's a wonderful path. It sounds, what I love about introductions is that we make it all sound so linear.
Yeah, that was planned.
Yeah. Just like I drafted it up at 22. So it's very interesting to think that, the software world existed before the internet, but it did. And so just take us back to those early days of Microsoft when Bill Gates was certainly still a force to be reckoned with within that organization and still very much in a growth phase, right, of their initial business model. But you highlight in your book a specific story about Word for Mac. And so I wonder if you could just give us a quick window into what that was like earlier in your career.
Yeah. So in these days, you could be very limited on what you did on computer based on things like your memory and the chip speed. And not everyone had, like, Microsoft's mission at this point in time was to put a desktop computer on everyone's desktop. And that was considered bold and novel. And so it was a very different time. You'd buy software in a store. There were a handful of software companies. Everybody knew everyone. And I think because of that, competition was very different. I mean, when you have just the competitors that you can see when you look to your left and look to your right, you play the game differently. And I think everyone was very fierce competitors with one another. And so they were always pushing the envelope of what was possible. And that's basically the story that Jeff's alluding to is we created this version of Word that was really leaps and bounds ahead of what the machines at the time could process in an ordinary way. Like, it take minutes to start up and like a long period of time to run spell check, things that you just wouldn't consider even mildly reasonable performance today. And we excused it because we're like, well, it's got the same version feature set as Windows. And isn't that what everybody wants, to be able to work the same on every platform? But what we discovered is Mac users say, hell no, we chose Mac because it's different. And we want it to work the way our Mac stuff works. And so it was a very, very cold and brutal shower into how fiercely and strongly certain communities feel about the choices that they make. And I'd say for myself as a person entering the workforce, it made me realize it's not just what might be strategically convenient or interesting or what is possible, but it's very much you have to meet markets where they are, and you have to acknowledge the passion and choices that markets make and understand the why. And so it was a really brutal way to learn that lesson.
It's not even in the realm of possibility to folks today, but the decision to upgrade from 16 to 32 megabytes of RAM was was more than the cost of the software in some cases. Or do you add a second hard drive because you're trying to add more software? And like you said, when you would start spell check and walk away because it would take 5 minutes to get to the first word.
Yeah. Or we literally had to ship a separate disk to accommodate the German words are very long. And so the German version of Word had an entire extra disk to accommodate the length of words. It was just such a different era.
And contrasting that era, then you obviously had an incredible window into the advent of the internet at Netscape, but it was more than just the internet. As I think the average consumer looks at it. To you, it was probably a complete shift because you went from the limits of disks, CD-ROMs, boxes, versions, etc., to something that was seemingly at the moment real time and limitless. You went from black all the way to white.
Yeah, I'll say I liken that moment in time to what we are experiencing now on AI, except that what we're experiencing now with AI is like 100x the velocity. But it was all of a sudden, every assumption we had made about how people get software, how they use it, how useful it needs to be, how feature rich it needs to be, all that suddenly went out the window. And it just changed everything, including what we thought should be built or how, again, the world that we came from was one in which the measure of a product's worth was how many features are packed into it. So you'd literally just like, can we pack in 100 new features? Yes. And now it was like, people don't care. They only use what they use. And then they move on to something else because they now had choice. They now had a web page to go to, not just software to use. And so when I saw this happening, there were a whole bunch of people that saw this internet thing happening. And it was a very small, deeply passionate crew inside of Microsoft that observed this and started to try and bring this change to Microsoft. And then it was like, all of a sudden, the internet light bulb went off. And this is what I give Microsoft credit for more than any other software company that I've ever observed. When they make a strategic decision, we are now going to be about this. Despite whatever size they are able to make that turn on a dime. Even if the products aren't ready, they will make a declaration. They will make the declaration to the world. They chose Pearl Harbor Day. It was like 6 weeks of everyone heads down. What's your internet strategy? Because we're launching it to the world, even if there's tiny little bits of pieces of product behind it. And it will take us years to deliver against that strategy. They launched it to tell the world, like, we are in this internet game. And it was extraordinary to witness and watch. That was an example of like changes happen and some companies can adapt to it much more quickly than others. And that level of change times 100 is upon us right now with AI.
And you bring an interesting perspective that I don't think I had intended to go this way, but it sounds like you have something interesting to offer. So if you'll indulge us, it's when I'm looking at my notes, you talked about, and I experienced this as a user, how solid, how rigid software was in the terms and sense of you bought this box of disks, you installed these disks on your machine, and you ran that version of the software. And you were limited by that software's capabilities. And the switching costs, again, at the time, from WordPerfect to Word, as an example, were really high. So you were locked in. And then you talk about the internet as this advent of choice. Now, today we take choice for granted. But at the time, that's what was truly revolutionary, was the idea of, it was a democratization movement. It was a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we experience bits and pieces of this in different ways. So the app ecosystem, I mean, you've got, depending on the day, between 5 and 6 or 7 or 8, depending which number you trust, million different apps to choose from. If you look at any category, it's kind of like, okay, here are 25 to choose from, 3 of which are exact, precise lookalikes to the official product. So it actually is hard. One of the reasons why I wrote my book is because we are in this moment of choice where we have so much out there that it becomes that much more difficult for consumers to understand, like, what should I be using? What's the right choice for me? And so being able to bring your product to market is more important now than the product building, because it's easy to bring, it's easy to build. It's easy to build lots of products, and so many of them look, sound, feel, and are alike. And so those nuances in how you show up in market wind up becoming more important.
Well, that's very interesting. And I'll tie back to what you just said is, if the internet is 100x if AI is 100x what the internet was, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's 100x new business models. It just means that, as you said, there's multiple choices of the same thing. And this idea, yes, we want choice, but we want to ensure that the choices that we're making are authentic.
Yeah.
And yes, there's ways to technically do that, but this brings in a big part of marketing is how do you align with someone's values to make them feel like their choice is authentic? And so tell us about that. Like what's this? I feel like it's a red thread. We've seen this movie. What's your opinion?
So I'll say a couple of things. One is on the 100x side, it's the speed and velocity at which this change is coming at us, where you have product cycles that normally would have taken years now happening in weeks. That's the part that is really changing things. So the very same product, I'm using ChatGPT or I'm using Claude, how it works today might be different than how the exact same prompt will function tomorrow. Like that's the speed at which we have it.
Yes.
So I think that is one thing that is different in shaping this next era is same product can show up really differently in a way that's invisible to us, but it will function differently. So that's a new mode that we have to get used to. But as it relates to brand, we'll take those two choices, ChatGPT versus Claude. They functionally do the same thing. And there are two ways in which Claude is. So ChatGPT has more direct users, probably it has the biggest brand in consumers' minds. And so what does that leave for Claude? Claude can be the enterprise safe choice. Claude can be the one that's opinionated and has an internal way of governing its decisions so that it acts within a certain ethical code. And so it's distinguished itself by the principles by which it operates, that it really decided to double down on code to say, we're pursuing general intelligence, of course, but we're going to focus on code first because we could kill that and totally nail that and be completely excellent at it. So it's made more opinionated choices. So for people who lean into this world and choose tools with great purpose and intention, many of us choose Claude because it has made those choices. And so that's why we make that choice. The other one has a better known brand, but we're making this thoughtful choice because of decisions that company has made and what that brand represents to us.
It's interesting you say that, and I appreciate you using that dichotomy. For example, I was kind of coding my own just email summary tool, right? Just for sake of argument. And then literally 3 weeks after I started, I was on Claude and it just said, oh, do you want to connect Gmail to Claude? And my first reaction was like, heck no. But if you think about it, the tool that I was programming before, I was using ChatGPT as the LLM to process it. So obviously it had extracted that information already. So it's like we're in this place where at the end of the day, privacy is something that's available to the ultra wealthy who can actually pay people to connect to the internet for them, or those who are on the complete other end of the spectrum who can't afford to access that online. And so if behind the scenes we're losing this privacy, then it is all about that front end image. And Claude has been very intentional about crafting that. They recently just, Dario came out and talked about the risks associated. And I think that's tongue in cheek. That could be, there are probably the cynical view could be that they're raising money. And so they're kind of making pronouncements that align with their values to inspire their investors. But nonetheless, I keep coming back to what you said, this idea of purpose and intention. And when we're designing for something that's nebulous, right? We're not designing a GoPro where all the electronics have to fit into a certain form factor, right? We're designing for something that's intangible. Is that still where the idea of product market fit aligns when you're dealing with something intangible? Or is there another lens that you look at that through?
Most definitely. As a matter of fact, I would say it has become, at least in my mind, being very market focused, it's more important in some cases than the product, because we're in an era where almost anything is possible on the product front. If you can imagine it, there's probably going to be some way to build it. And this happens in venture all the time. There'll be technology movements, and all of a sudden in the span of 2 months, you'll have 10 different companies pitch you something that's very similar. And the people who are proposing these ideas are all expert in their fields, but they have slightly different approaches, and they're all reasonable, and they're all reasonable approaches. They're all smart in their particular way. But how you might make a choice as a VC is you'll say, who's going to be more successful in their next fundraise because of either their approach or their brand or their commercial orientation. And that's a big thing because there are tons of technologists. They massively underestimate what it actually takes to bring something to market. So you're looking for someone that says, I know this is going to be hard. That's why we've made this choice. We're going to target this user to land or this segment to land in, totally nail. And from that, we're going to grow. So you can see that they understand the path that they're going to be on, that it's always a journey on commercialization. And it's that entrepreneur or that entrepreneurial team who you know has at least the mindset that will help them succeed. Because again, it's easy to build products today. It's much harder to break through in markets. And so that becomes the more important thing.
At the Berkeley Innovation Group, we are a strategy consultancy and AI advisory firm focused on mid-market companies looking to unlock big growth. In contrast to management consultants' typical top-down, hypothesis-driven approach, Big uses a curiosity-inspired, bottom-up approach, leveraging customer insights to drive strategy co-creation. Learn more about our approach by downloading our ebook at biginnovates.com/ebook. Now, back to the show. Welcome back, everyone. What I found most interesting was this idea of moving from something fixed to something flexible. That's what I've heard a lot about in this conversation. So before it was fixed software to flexible software on the internet. And now we're seeing even the speed at which AI is developing and increasing humans' capabilities can make what we thought were nimble approaches feel fixed. So in this world that's constantly accelerating, you can bring around the best technologists, as you said, but what you as a marketer call out is that the true differentiator when we're looking at something that's moving as quick as AI is this concept of market product fit.
Yeah. So what do I mean by that? So we'll take the Claude and ChatGPT example where ChatGPT had a head start. And Claude knew that it was going to build something that was very similar. So it looks at the market and says, where's there space for us? And where can our approach stand out within this market since this other player has a head start? You mentioned privacy earlier, Jeff. That's what Apple decided to do. They're like, we're going to say that privacy is the most important thing because beyond the product allure that we have, that's something that we can stand on that distinguishes and differentiates us. And so when you don't have the resources of an Apple or an Amazon or an Anthropic or a ChatGPT to muscle the world toward you, then it becomes that much more important for you to understand where the market is so you can meet it where it is, as opposed to trying to bring the market to you. And it's pure physics. If these people are over here and they are the ones that if I'm trying to reach large enterprises and this is their key watering hole, these are the events that they go to, then I should meet them where they are, as opposed to trying to make noise about myself and advertise and promote and say like, hey, aren't you an enterprise? Don't you want to come to us? There's a movement. I'd say a trend right now inside of marketing circles where they say, hey, the old playbooks are dead. And it's because marketers have killed them. That's so much bad marketing and like random people texting you or reaching out on email that we're just becoming numb. And so that market product fit means let me meet the market where it is. And if you slipstream a reasonable product into where that market is, it is much easier to get adoption than the other way around, which is, hey, everybody, look, my product, and trying to make noise and have the market find you. And again, it's just a pure numbers game. I'll give you a really simple analogy.
Please.
If you were a new potato chip in the supermarket and you went into the produce section, no one paid attention to you. They'd walk right by. You're like, well, potato chips. Somebody just ran them.
They're not looking for potato chips.
They're not looking for potato chips in the produce section. You might have a shot in the drink section because someone's drinking drinks and they're like, oh, we have potato chips. There's a little more alignment. But if you're in the potato chip section, when someone's cruising down the potato chip aisle, you're going to be found. And so we have now created the supermarket equivalent of software. And so now we just need to be where markets are at.
So what you're saying is, if as entering this market, I have two choices. I can either carve out a niche in an existing aisle. So if I'm a potato chip, maybe I'm, air fried versus oil fried, right? That's my niche, but I'm placing that product in the potato chip market. And are you saying that because there aren't many empty shelves left? Or is AI expanding, to abuse the metaphor, is AI expanding the supermarket and there's new areas being constructed? Like, how is this evolving?
The answer is both. Okay. So it's kind of like when organic happened. So organic, when it first started happening, was a tiny little section in every grocery store. Right. Here's the organic section, and they would cram all the organic food in there, and it was a health food store. It became a movement. Now it's just integrated everywhere. And the same thing is going to be true. Right now, we are looking for, everyone in the software industry calls it the grand AI washing of everything. Everything's AI washed, but it's just going to be how things are done at a certain point in time. And so it's just going to, it won't be something that distinguishes a product. It'll just be presumed. Same thing happened with the internet. And if you are a company with tremendous resources, we keep using our supermarket metaphor, you can buy an end cap. I'm going to buy an end cap. So everybody sees the new drinks and pretzels and all the other things that we want people to see and notice us. And I'm going to have someone handing out samples. That takes resources. It's absolutely possible, and you can do it. But if you're going to do it, you have to do it in a big way for it to get noticed and stand out. So there are all different ways to play the game. There are always opportunities. And some of this is just recognizing as a company where you are in a certain point of time. So part of market product fit is you have to recognize where you are on the technology acquisition curve. As an early stage company, your number one job is to find people who can be wildly evangelistic about you. And you're going to increase your chances if you're a potato chip being in a potato chip aisle. Increase. There are other ways to do it, but it's just a little more likely. If you're further up on the curve, so we're now going to the big fat part of the bell curve where we're no longer just talking about early adopters, where our momentum, our brand, our awareness can carry us. Then we might choose partners. Let's partner with Pepsi and we'll do an end cap together. And then that's just going to massively increase the number of people that see both of us because of this power of association. So as you move up that bell curve, more options become available to you. And a key part of figuring out the market product fit game is playing that card at the right time.
And in that, I'm not necessarily hiring the best potato chip scientist, best food scientist to make a better product, so to speak, because it doesn't matter if I have the best potato chip if I'm not playing in the right space.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll give it a great example for like our favorite new pretzel. They started in COVID. It's this mom and daughter team, Stellar Pretzels. They don't have wide distribution. They have hyper-specific distribution. They went into smaller distribution stores. Then they got a deal with Southwest Airlines. And people were like, these are delicious. Where do I find these? Because they were not a brand that you knew.
Right.
And then that parlayed into a Whole Foods. So they didn't go straight to Whole Foods. They basically started off in a place where people were like, whoa, these are yummy. And they can be discovered. The aisles are smaller. That people are looking for things that are novel and interesting and have flavors that they haven't heard before. They created an absolutely fabulous pretzel. Let's be clear. I don't think you can create a crappy product. Yeah. There is too much choice. So you have to have a good product, but it's the combination. So they have artwork on beautiful artwork. They're like, we want artwork on our packaging that's as distinct as our pretzel. And it's the cute little drawing of the mom and daughter team that started it. So all of this is part of the brand, and all of this is part of how they came to market. And that's part of why they stand out. So even though you get like a quarter of the same number of pretzels in a package, you'll still buy, and they're the same price as something that gives you 2-3 times as much. You're like, it's a superior product. I really like it. I'm willing to do that.
I think they realize that their customers are not people who are going to eat 100 pretzels in a sitting.
That's right.
That's intelligent. This actually brings up, and I know this is a kind of a recent news story as we're recording this, and it may be, just accepted by the time this is released, but Perplexity in talks with Samsung about being the default LLM on Samsung phones. And why this is interesting is, obviously Samsung and Android have had a very strong partnership for many years. And the idea of Perplexity being native to that phone and not Gemini is pretty shocking in a way. And so with that being said, what I find interesting about Perplexity's product is they don't necessarily build the best LLM. I mean, in fact, they trumpet the fact that they are open and you can access multiple LLMs on their platform. Is this a case where they are buying that end cap, as you said.
Yes, they're buying the Pepsi partnership, 100%. Yeah. Well, most people don't remember this, but Google did something very similar back in the day. So back in the day, Yahoo was the preferred search engine for everyone. And so Google just made it their mission. Google was used by the passionate, knowledgeable that were sort of Silicon Valley geeks. We all loved it, but the world didn't know about Google. And so they made it their mission to become the search driving driving Yahoo. And took them a year to get there. But it was part of what helped them explode. And of course, now they've massively surpassed Yahoo because they focused on doing something really, really well. And so this is Perplexity's equivalent of that, which is, you know what? We're going to partner with the largest Android distributor that's out there, and we're going to disrupt Google at their own game. And we're going to replace the search, I'm putting that in air quotes, functionality with Perplexity. But this is meeting the market where it is. So market product fit. Rather than us trying to just like, hey, Perplexity, blah, blah, here's how we're different. Let's meet them at their behavior. I search. I don't really care what's behind it. I just want a good answer.
Correct.
And as long as the answer is good and is providing a really strong user experience, then Samsung is happy. And so is Perplexity because it's going to elevate them. So it's great strategy.
I agree. I think it's a very smart strategy. And also because Perplexity realizes that, like you talked about earlier, you can't muscle your way into a market that's already dominated by giants, and that being desktop, right? You're not going to become native to desktop as easily as you can become native to mobile, because mobile, in my experience, is more transactional, right? I'm not doing deep research on my phone as much as I am on my desktop. But on the flip side, when I am on my phone, increasingly the traditional search engine is feeling clunky. It's feeling like it's actually too much work.
Yeah.
And, on the iPhone, you have the button you can double click and it pulls up an LLM chat because that's what's going to give me the fastest answer. So I don't, we spend a lot of time trying to focus on strategy on this podcast and not get caught up in the news. But I feel like basically with the framework you've given and this news, there's a real strategic shift in this one announcement.
Yeah, huge. Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think when you have major shifts, this is a huge technology shift that creates this incredible window of opportunity that could be taken advantage of in a lot of different ways. And I think for people that are trying to meld, I think it's probably a lot of what you guys focus on, which is there's markets, there's products, then there's strategy, and how does all this stuff intersect? There are moments in time in which a window exogenously is open for us by something that happens. And it's whether or not you are positioned to take advantage of that and you run through that opportunity that it represents.
Yeah, my undergrad was during the .com boom. So while you were at Netscape, I was, in my dorm room coding HTML in a text window. But working with AI tools today feels the exact same way. Now that's a 30-year difference in time, but that window has opened again. And that happens 2 or 3 times in a career. It doesn't happen that frequently. So I tell and I know, we didn't share this at the top, but we both teach at UC Berkeley. And that's something that I tell my students is this isn't the time to choose a company that helps you start a career. Because right now, the companies that are going to own AI or have a place at the table in AI are literally being created by the week. And this is that once in a generation opportunity. You've got to jump through it and ask questions later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. But I'll also acknowledge as having a daughter that's trying to enter the job market. It's a tough job market out there. So It's kind of like you go where you find something that's an intersection of what you have to offer the world and where the world is at. And sometimes there are times in our career where we can't be overly precious about it. And what I'll add to what Jeff's saying is there used to be a handful of golden pedigree companies that, if you get your card punched here, it just makes your career. And I do think that's the big thing that's changing, which is go someplace and you have learned something really, really valuable. And I think this is the big thing. What big companies can expose you to is what does excellence look like? That's what you don't get if you just work anywhere. And so you want to try and find ways to learn both. And what's changed is you don't need to rely on a company to give you that. you can actually rely on the tools and the ecosystem that surrounds you to help you calibrate what excellent looks like.
Let me pull on that thread, if you will. And I think college has typically focused on developing the product, the student, and then there's career services that market that product to get the job. But if I was a student, to apply your framework, should I be more focused on the market than maybe I am? Or am I at such a point in a young stage of my career that the product does need to be honed a little?
I think it's, like I said, you can't be a sucky product. And that will just always be true. It's
That's
more
right.
How do you position the product that you have? And so in this case, like let's say, so I'll just use my daughter, who right now is in the thick of it. She did a project where she basically like combed through this data set, taught herself how to program, all using ChatGPT. That's showing that she has the foundational skill set that is necessary to succeed in the future. And she figured it. No, she didn't take a college course on it. She didn't major in AI. She majored in sociology. But that tells her future employer, this person knows how to take initiative. They know how to teach themselves, and they were intrepid with it. They just go for it. So I'm sure that is serving her very well in her conversations. But that's the sort of combination of, you have a product, but then you need to intersect it with where the world is moving. That's the market, and make that connection. So she's brought up that example in all of her interviews, and that's been important.
It's so well said. And it's, again, we talk about how AI is a great convergence engine, but it goes back to what I always teach in human-centered design is the value of asking the right question.
Yeah.
And your daughter clearly was able to ask the right question. Now, she used ChatGPT as a tool to help her converge, and in this case, converge on a certain skill set. But AI at this point cannot replace the ability to synthesize all of the multimodal inputs that we as humans take and to make that strategic directional choice.
Yeah, that's such a core thing in this, because everyone's like, wow, with AI doing all this, what do we need our humanity for? And the key thing is judgment.
Yeah.
And like this just happened yesterday, where both ChatGPT and Claude, I was using them for very different things, and they were giving me weird answers. And I had to know, it was like, this is incorrect. And I had to challenge it. And it would literally write back, you're right, this is wrong. We'll revisit it. And I was like, whoa, if I had just taken that on face value, because it showed me all these calculations, it was doing all this code. And I was like, it used the wrong data set. I had to recognize that it used the wrong data set, and the answer that it gave me, didn't just take it verbatim. Same thing with, again, that was Claude. Later in the evening, I was using ChatGPT for something else, and it was giving me training advice. I basically created this custom GPT to train me for this event that I'm doing this summer. And I didn't think it was giving me good advice. And so I said, I'm going to refeed you the data, and I'm going to point out 2 back-to-back workouts that were really long. And do you still think this is the right recommendation? And it said, thanks for pointing that out. Now that I'm paying attention to that, I would actually advise you differently. And I was like, what? The data was right there.
Yes.
So these are just great examples of, even if the data is there, and even if what it's presenting you is a reasonable response, your job as a human will always be to exercise judgment and say, well, is this the best response? It's not just if it's reasonable. Is it the best response given what I'm trying to do? Should I push it? I'd say, like, all of these models, push it, or use the models against one another and say, like, this is what the response I got from ChatGPT, put it in Claude and see if it gives you something different, and synthesize, as Jeff was saying. Like that is our unique role, is don't take these outputs on face value, but synthesize, process them through your judgment brain and say, this is how I'm using it to improve my output or outcome, but I'm not going to take it on face value.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. And that's getting to the product piece. So we've talked about finding that market and meeting the market. Don't try and muscle your way into a market or artificially pull people into the market that your product is meant to serve, but instead be in service to that market. But as you said, you can't have a crappy product. Your product does have to meet a threshold, which is the the value proposition of an undergraduate education, of course. But when we're at that point where it's time, we've met the market with our product, and it's time to get that story out there and to really begin evangelizing what we're doing. What are some of the roles or tactics that you found that have been really successful, maybe ones you touch on in your book, about how to really help communicate and evangelize what a company is doing?
Yeah. So in Loved, I talk about the 4 foundational and fundamental principles of product marketing. And I made them just 4 because that way anyone can apply it to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Founder to how they're bringing shape to their company and to their product, or someone sitting down who's writing collateral. And the 4 foundational fundamentals are: 1, to act as an ambassador. That's between the customer and the market, and vice versa, and the product. All those things together, because you need all 3 of those things to do anything that is worthwhile, and to do the synthesis that we were talking about. The second is strategist, because you need the first thing to be able to succeed. But it's just like what Jeff and I were talking about. You need what makes sense, what you say, how you position things depends on the strategy. If I'm going to try and convince Samsung that Perplexity is the right choice for them, it's very different than if I'm trying to bring Perplexity directly to a user. That's why strategy then is number 2. And then third is the storyteller, which is not just how do you tell your story, but it's how do you help the world, how do you shape the world's perception of your product? It might be through story elements, it might be through video, it might be through a distribution deal. So it's helping shape the world's perception through the elements that let them tell your story, which is number 4. That's evangelist. And that's enabling others to be evangelists on your behalf. Because we are in an era where people trust the official source least. If I go to your website and this is what you say you are, I'm like, okay, that's a point of information. Now let me go see what influencers have to say, or what social media has to say, or what a comparison site says, or what AI says. I will trust that more than anything that you say about yourself directly. So we have to think about bringing a product to market through the lens of what lets other people successfully tell our story or evangelize on our behalf as users, or whatever. It might be Salesforce if you're a B2B. How do I do that successfully? So those are the 4 foundational elements that you want to just think through in whatever endeavor you're trying to do when you're bringing something to market.
Ambassador, strategist, storyteller, and evangelist. And again, going back to what we talked about with AI, is AI can give you observations, but it still has a hard time uncovering those true customer insights, the why behind the what. It can help with strategy, bringing in frameworks, but only the leader of that organization understands from experience, just has that intuitive sense of, I've seen this before, or A and B lined up. And I know that A and B usually leads to C, and to make that investment with confidence beyond just a spreadsheet, but from that lived experience. And then the last 2 are just purely communication.
Yeah.
AI is not going to replace a passionate human storyteller.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, I'm biased, but I think that's safe to say.
For sure. Well, we'll use social media as a great example of that. The rise of the influencer. If you were an influencer on a particular product category, let's say watches, Garmin watches, and you're like, I've reviewed every Garmin watch there's been. I don't even know you, but if I see you have 100 videos evaluating every video, I'm like, well, I'm going to trust this guy because he's looked at everything, even though I don't know him. And I'll trust him more than if I go to Garmin's website. That's a change that I don't think is going to go away.
Yeah, I've actually, just through my experience, I used to always, before AI, I was so worried that when I would write a blog post or a social media post, that was factually correct, right? And that's how we were raised in college. You couldn't plagiarize, right? You had to be factually correct. At work, your boss, the flow of information was such that they actually had time to review work diligently and to give that feedback and that iteration process. But then after AI has come along, I found that it's not that we are intentionally misinforming people, but that level of detail, I think, has suffered a little because the marketplace, as you said, is rewarding volume and that presence of, well, if you have 100 videos, you obviously know what you're talking about, vis-a-vis what the company may have taken a long time to craft a very intentional message. And that's the push-pull that I'm seeing right now. Besides just general content, and I don't want to go there, I want to go deeper. How is AI just making a change to marketing strategy or product marketing strategy? And then where is this going? And if you have any prognostications, we're always welcome.
I don't think it's changing product marketing strategy. It is 100% changing the tactics. And How do you create the outputs? You talked about volume and content. Everything that it creates, it will be technically correct. So especially in the realm of product marketing, it doesn't get the technology stuff wrong, which is often where product marketers as humans might have a blind spot or two. So it gets that part correct. But what it doesn't, but then it has these two modes. It's factually correct about the technology, and then it's promotional. And it is very bad at the stuff that's in between. It perceives marketing as being promotional and not connective and authentic. And you asked me this question at the very beginning, which is like, how do you create that authenticity? This is where human knowledge is required so that you parse what you might see it generating and say, like, sometimes being promotional is okay, but sometimes you really just want this thing that feels like a more authentic connection. This is why we've had the rise of the influencer and why you like a video of a human being saying something over an ad that is proclaiming something. AI is changing the volume at which that stuff can get created, or what looks like influencer. This looks like a human that's actually saying something. Like, I've seen all this product surface area around AI generated influencer content. You tell it what to say, it looks like a real human being that's actually having this influencer style discussion that's done in the style of TikTok and all these other things. So I think the implication of that is we're going to go through this trust cycle where we're going to be really, really skeptical of what we see, because there's going to be so much, and anything that seems like ordinary or too good to be true, justly so, we will be skeptical of, and we'll have to have these, I'll call them truth engines. This is making a claim. Let me put it somewhere to verify whether or not this is true. So it will play a role in ways that we probably haven't anticipated. But I think that the challenge we will face writ large is, what do we believe? And how do we test if something is true?
I really align with what you shared in terms of what do we believe? And there was always criticism that, well, we would believe the internet over another person. And now it's going to be, do we believe AI over the internet? Or do we believe AI over another human? And as a marketer, that's what I would look at as really the canary of a directional change. It is what's influencing people's beliefs. How much stock do people put in their beliefs? How much stock do they put in the beliefs of others? And is that trust still driving transactions? Or has it gotten to the point that it is transactional? And when like Temu, for example, right, had a real moment here in the US, like that was transactional. That wasn't about trust, my opinion. And, regardless of what you think about the tariffs, they've closed that window. And can we still live in that transactional environment? Or is that a signal that maybe trust is making a comeback, or trust is something that I should be more concerned about?
It's funny, Jeff, to bring us all the way back to where this conversation started. I have been struck. We had a go-to-market summit at Costanoa 2 weeks ago, and I was very struck at the end of it that quote unquote modern marketing is going to go back to where we were pre-digital. The stuff that you're going to trust is the stuff where I'm in a room with my peers. They're talking about what they've actually used. They're talking about what they've actually done. That's an environment of high trust. And so if I get signal from something like that, it's going to be credible. I'm going to be very skeptical of digital C, because it's just going to be an ocean of stuff that, is all very similar. And there'll be islands of high trust, but you'll have to find them for whatever thing you are seeking out. Digital has moved us all the way past to go back to analog, going like, well, strong marketing is really going to be how do you, in the analog world, establish credibility and trust such that when people move to whatever digital forms, whatever they might be, that there's enough credibility that will overcome the digital skepticism that we all should have.
I've taken away the two comments that I kind of bracketed on my notes here was marketing still remains that connective tissue between the strategy and the tactics. And the tactics go off the rails when they fail to connect to strategy. But if that strategy is based on user needs, then the marketing is that connective tissue to the tactics that then bring it full circle, as you just said. And that creates this, it's just beautiful language. islands of high trust. And I couldn't think of a better note to wrap our conversation on than just going forward as marketers, looking at the future to build, maintain, and connect with other islands of high trust.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
That was gorgeous. Thank you. Well, I will put in the show notes where you can find more about Martina's book and Loved, and then also connecting on LinkedIn. But note, she'll be off the grid this summer. I won't spoil anything, but a well-earned break before getting back. And who knows, maybe you'll come back and AI will have changed the world, and maybe it'll just have incrementally improved. But either way, it'll be different.
Yeah.
And that's what's keeping it interesting right now.
Sure is. Sure is. Well, what a lovely discussion.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.